be aligned with our allies, understanding that, I mean, listen, guys, we're talking about the potential for war in Europe. I mean, let's really take a moment to understand the significance of what we're talking about. It's been over 70 years. And through those 70 years, as I mentioned yesterday, there has been peace and security. We are talking about the real possibility of war in Europe. So our position is, for us, very clear, which is, as a leader, which we have been, bringing together the allies, working together around our collective and unified position, that we would all, not just prefer, we desire, we believe, it is in the best interest of all that there is a diplomatic end to this moment. And so where do we want this to end? That is where we want it to end.
What should Americans be braced for? What could they possibly be facing? The President has already said Americans will be facing some economic fallout or some hardships. Can you explain to Americans what exactly will they face if this happens?
Sure. As the President talked about in his speech, we are aware that, again, when America stands for her principles and all of the things that we hold dear, it requires sometimes for us to put ourselves out there in a way that maybe we will incur some cost. And in this situation, that may relate to energy costs, for example. But we are taking very specific and appropriate, I believe, steps to mitigate what that cost might be if it happens.
Let's go to Eli at the Los Angeles Times.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. A question about something else that President Zelensky said yesterday relating to NATO. He seemed to question the sincerity of allies, including the U.S., I think, in terms of a desire to admit Ukraine to NATO. Is there any reaction to those pretty pointed comments from the President? And was that something that was discussed with Chancellor Scholz and other leaders?
Let me start by saying I appreciate and admire President Zelensky's desire to join NATO. And one of, again, the founding principles of NATO is that each country must have the ability, unimpaired, unimpeded, to determine their own future, both in terms of their form of government and, in this case, whether they desire to be a member of NATO. And I'll put that in context because the obvious is also the point, which is that, and therefore no other country can tell anyone whether they should or should not join NATO. That should be their independent choice. That is the point of sovereignty. So I respect President Zelensky's desire to be a member of NATO. NATO is a membership. It is about nations coming together as a group, making decisions collectively around, again, principles, and what will be then the conditions and the standards of membership. And so that is the process. It doesn't happen overnight. No one country can say, I want to be, and therefore I will be. And no one country can say, you can't be. And isn't that at the heart of the very issue we're presented with in terms of Russia's aggression or stated aggression toward Ukraine?
Was it surprising to you, though, that he planted that flag so firmly on that issue, given that that's obviously Putin's main demand, is that he gets some sort of guarantee swearing that Ukraine won't be admitted, and that Zelensky wants to make it clear that they do want an end to the organization? Was that a surprise that he would come and say that at this point in this crisis, and does that make it less likely that there'll be some sort of diplomatic resolution?
I am not going to second-guess President Zelensky's desires for his own country. But I will say this. Let us recognize the position he is in right now. His country is virtually surrounded by Russian troops. I believe he came here. This is my belief, based on just my own assessment and speculation. He came here to make a very clear point, that he does not stand alone. In fact, I told him in our meeting, the United States stands with you. Because we do. As do this community of allies and partners. So I understand why he came here, and I would not second guess, I will not second guess why he spoke the words he speaks. He's in a position again where his country is virtually surrounded by what, I think, most reasonable people would believe, hostile troops.
Let's go to Amr at the AP, please.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. So Dalip Singh said late last week that SWIFT sanctions probably won't be part of the opening gambit if sanctions go forward. Considering the administration saying early and often that you're going to start high and stay high, how does that square? How can you start high and stay high without SWIFT sanctions in the package?
We're going to take this one moment at a time in terms of what might need to happen in the future in terms of escalation. But right now, we've made our position clear.
And last question, let's go to Natasha at CNN.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I'm wondering whether the U.S. has evidence that Putin has actually given the order to his subordinates to launch an attack, and whether that intelligence and that evidence is shared and agreed upon by the allies here, and that includes Zelensky, who has been skeptical of this kind of intelligence in the past.
As the President has said, we believe that Putin has made his decision. Period. And, but I will also say that as part of our relationship and partnership and in the context of the alliance, we do share information, certainly, because we want to make sure that we are all working with the same information when we make these very critical and meaningful decisions. The last question about sanctions. And I said it yesterday on the stage. Everybody didn't agree at the beginning about what the consequences should be if Russia reinvades Ukraine. We had to meet. We had to discuss it. Because each of these nations, I mean, I spent time, considerable amount of time with the Chancellor of Germany yesterday. I spent time with the President of the EU yesterday. When we look at the significance of these sanctions, they are immense. And so all nations who are a part of this understand that we cannot take lightly or speak lightly about what we are prepared to do, because we do understand the cost we are exacting. And it is severe. So we have had these discussions, again, through a process. We have arrived at this place. And back to the last question, we will obviously reassess, depending on how the days, weeks, and months ahead roll out.
And do you
Thank you all.
Well, just go on. You can go with the follow-up, and then we'll come.
I was just going to ask, do you believe that the U.S. and Ukraine are now more on the same page about what the intelligence suggests than they have been in the past?
I can tell you that there has been direct communication about the intelligence. So
Vice President,
nothing's being held back.
the Prime Minister of Italy does not agree with all of the sanctions plans. He said yesterday that he does not feel that energy should be sanctioned. Does that not undercut U.S. efforts to impose tough, painful, severe financial sanctions?
As I've said, this is an alliance of nations that each have their priorities and their individual concerns about how anything we do going forward will impact their specific country, their economy, and their security. So again, I would not deny Italy from having its perspective or its list of concerns. We all do, actually. That has been part of this process. And so Italy is very much at the table in terms of these conversations about how we can do this in a way that achieves its intended purpose, which, back to the earlier point, is about deterring Russia from invading a sovereign nation. And we all understand, including every country in Europe, what war in Europe looks like and what it can mean for the citizens of each of those countries. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am.
So we've just been listening to US Vice President Kamala Harris speaking from the Munich Security Conference, reiterating that the United States, as well as the other Western